Brendan Rodgers is back as Celtic manager. We are here to react to it. This is 20 Minute Tims. I'm your host Jamie, and I'm joined by Stephen.
Hello.
And Melly.
Oh yes.
With his bag of cans. New manager, pre-season taking off, new players. Follow us on patreon.com/20minutetims. We will bring in you Celtic's pre-season under Brendan Rodgers. Extra writing, extra podcasts, extra videos, and you can support the podcast patreon.com/20minutetims. What do you think was a harder sell? Selling Patreon to the listeners and viewers, or selling a Celtic return to Brendan Rodgers?
Well, we sit here a week on from our video. It feels so long ago. We were so young and innocent back last week when we were talking about it as if this was still just a mad rumour. He had just edged into the sort of the leading horse in this race. He was the favourite, so we spoke about it last week. And what I said was, I just can't see it. I can't even picture it. And as we sit here a week on with the confirmation that he is the Celtic manager for the second time, I still can't quite believe it. I think I need the pictures. I think I need the press conference and all that to fully digest it. But as we sit here, it's really quite difficult to digest this, isn't it? It's been a roller coaster of a week.
Never in a million years. Never. When did he leave? 4 years ago?
See, February 2016 was it? Something like
was
that?
It? No, it was 2019.
Sorry, 2019.
Yeah, it was 2019. Yeah. So about 4 years ago, when we recorded that now infamous "He's Never Going to Leave" podcast that we've referenced many, many times, I just could not envisage a Brendan Rodgers return to Celtic for a number of reasons.
You do yourself a bit of a disservice there. You have mentioned on this podcast that you see a scenario when Ange leaves that Brendan Rodgers returns as manager. Didn't think you quite meant it right now, did you? No. Maybe next year or the year after, but everything seemed to fall into place for this to happen, didn't it? Everything had to fall into place, and now it's here. I always say, look, I can see it happening, but I can't see it happening, so I'll believe it when I see it. Still not quite seen it yet, but I do believe it now, and I believe we're in for a good ride again.
I mean, there's a couple of strands to this Brendan Rodgers story. Right off the bat, we'll get the boring bit out the way. In terms of managerial appointments, pretend he didn't have the history that he does. Imagine he didn't work for Celtic before. There is no Brendan Rodgers history. He comes right off the back of that Leicester run, and he's Celtic's next manager after Ange Postecoglou. Stephen, is that a good hire or not?
Oh yeah, I don't think much has changed from last week when we discussed whether he was or wasn't the number one candidate in terms of his CV and all that. Again, it's very difficult to separate entirely the history and the politics from it, which we'll get into, of course, because people have been outspoken on that kind of thing already, and we're only a few hours on from the announcement. But there's no doubt he was the number one candidate for the job. Absolutely no doubt. When you talk about the competitors that were in there, Maresca, guys like Knutson, or however you pronounce that, we spoke about them all last week, and they all had their various appeals, but the guy who ticked the most boxes, including knowing the city and all the stupid stuff we laugh about before, but he does know kind of what it takes him, that he knows what it's all about at Celtic and all that stuff, right? And he knows the good and the bad of that, right? So he must have agreed to something when he came back up the road. But there's no doubt that Brendan Rodgers was by far and away the number one candidate for the job, and I'm glad he's got it. It feels really, really weird right enough. I never thought for a single second, I never thought he'd be back. I know there was all the talk about how he had unfinished business at Celtic. He seemed like things kind of fell into place now because he was out of work, kind of like the last time. We need a manager, we need a high profile manager, we need a guy who can, if not fill those massive personality shoes of Ange Postecoglou, sort of do something along those lines as well, because we can't just go to a guy, an almost like voiceless coach guy like Enzo Maresca from the whirlwind that was Ange Postecoglou. Can we really go from that to just a guy who's in to coach and take the first team and can't really deal with the media and all that? So Brendan Rodgers coming back, it's exciting, but it's still very, very hard to take in.
As far as a managerial appointment goes, Melly, for me this is top drawer.
Oh, it's box office again, and no matter what you think about Brendan Rodgers and his Celtic supporting life,
we're going to cover it all. We will cover it all.
I think the fact is, but if you're looking at a manager who has successfully managed in the Premier League 3 times, won an FA Cup there fairly recently, there's no chance we would be able to get him if he didn't have an affiliation with Celtic. Absolutely no chance. And to get a manager of this repute for Celtic again after losing Ange a couple of weeks ago, it's big dog energy. It's absolutely big dog energy. It is the appointment that probably the easiest for Celtic in terms of that's the guy we should get. Making it happen is another thing, and it looks like they've made it happen. And now that things are different from when he was first got the job. Celtic have moved on a lot. Things have moved on a lot. Celtic are in a position now where they have never been on. We could be possibly strengthening from a position of strength, unheard of in Celtic's history. So I'm looking forward to it. I think he's going to be a very different manager to Ange. Doesn't mean he won't be as good.
Let's talk about that Premier League success a wee bit. Let's dig into it, because one of the pushback things people have been saying about Brendan Rodgers is, he was a Premier League manager, and if there's any concerns I've got, and I said this last week when I used my hackneyed Range Rover comparison about how the game maybe, you don't get too many bites at the Premier League cherry, and Brendan Rodgers is a canny guy, and maybe he thinks, there's no too many options for me here in the Premier League. He did get a late offer apparently from Leeds, and he didn't really want to drop down the leagues there, and instead that was something else under consideration. But let's talk about the Leicester stuff. There's a lot of people saying, he failed at Leicester.
Yeah.
He nearly got Leicester, or he did get Leicester relegated. He's responsible for all that, and we touched on it last week. We said, this is partly to do with the business model, the financial fair play, the COVID season really stretched Leicester's finances. They had to sell a lot of players and all that sort of stuff. So let's run through Brendan Rodgers at Leicester. In his first full season there, did they finish fifth? Am I right in saying that?
Yeah. So people can look at it and say he sort of failed there. I don't think he has. I think the fact is, if he had have done any better at Leicester, he wouldn't be at Celtic right now. He would be either still there or in a better job. When he first went there, I think he took over when they were 15th. He guided them away from relegation easily. They had a good end to the season. But when he went down, things have changed a bit now because Newcastle, but when he went down, there was a top six in England. That was it. There was the top six, and that was it. He broke that twice.
Yeah.
He broke that twice. That is incredible to do that. He won an FA Cup first time ever for Leicester, possibly.
Probably,
I think he did a really good job. But the thing was, for a guy that is slagged or said that he's not loyal, he was probably too loyal to Leicester, in that he stayed on when he probably should have left at the start of the season, knowing he wasn't going to get the money, knowing that players were leaving. The team had sort of come to end its cycle, and it was probably the right time for him to leave. So I think he done a great job at Leicester to have them up there challenging. They should have got fourth at least once, probably twice, but this is what happens when you're not that team, and that's why there is a top six, because they're consistent and they do it.
I think it was no second season he missed out in fourth place on the last day. There was some big dramatic finish to that.
And again, out of context, that's taken as failure. But I mean, we're talking about Leicester here, and as Melly's already detailed, we're talking about how there are six major clubs at any given time. That changes. Maybe one drops out and another, becomes. Spurs weren't always part of that. Now they kind of are, and then they fell away again. So it's always different. But there's a reason they talk about the top six in England. That may even be seven now because Newcastle have joined that now. But Leicester aren't one of those. Yeah, they won the league years ago now, and that was an incredible story. But that's not the norm for them, and I find it a little bit tedious now. I mean, I'm not interested here in sweeping under the carpet all of the guys' failings and misgivings. Anything I'm not just any of his shortcomings. I'm not going to do that. But I think to just
his height,
I think to just blanket label everything either outright success or total failure is kind of where the online discourse has gone with football. It's a little bit tedious. I don't think you can look at a club like Leicester finishing fifth twice and the European run they had and winning the FA Cup and say it was an absolute failure just because they get relegated at the end of it. They were always going to go down eventually, whether it was Brendan Rodgers or whoever was going to likely take. I mean, they've tried a few things now. They went down because they basically ran out of money or weren't prepared to spend it anymore. I've seen it pointed out that they spent a lot of money on Suter, and there was a Belgian, I think, or French, or Weiss, I think, centre half, spent 15 million or so on them, and that in Scottish terms is a huge amount of money. But in England, it's absolutely nothing. That's proof that they don't have any money if they're going out and spending 15 million pound on Championship players, because Championship clubs, they're dealing with big money as well. 15 million is absolutely nothing in England, so. Pointing to that and saying, "I bet he spent a fortune towards the end" is just completely it's inaccurate to be honest. Yeah, so I don't think you can label his time at Leicester an outright failure. I think that's ridiculous, to be honest. Just that we concentrate far too much on how things end rather than the journey along the way. Right. We've just done it recently as well, and it's understandable. But there's a tendency if things end not the way that's ideal or the way people would want them. a couple of days after Ange left, we were looking for reasons. We're scrabbling around going, why was this all bullshit all along? Why was this terrible?
And I just say it's a catch-22, isn't it? Or Melly, you said it rather. It's a catch-22. If he'd finished, fifth with Leicester, and we wanted him to be our manager, even if Brendan Rodgers wanted to be Celtic manager, he wouldn't have left a Leicester team that he was in the verge of breaking the top four with. We couldn't have afforded to get him anyway. The only reason he sat here today is because how things ended with him at Leicester, but that doesn't necessarily mean his whole time at Leicester was a failure. And it's been sort of prevailing. He's only there because he failed at Leicester. No, having had a read through how he did at Leicester and the things we've spoken about, I just don't really. I think it's a mischaracterisation to call that a failure in any manner of means. And then there's the European run that they got on as well. I mean, it's Leicester we're talking about here.
Yeah, see, to be honest, he is obviously there's Claudio Ranieri, and then you're reaching back in the pre-Premier League era. There's a reason people talk kind of pre and post Premier League, because that was the kind of advent and the kind of revolution of like fitness. And when Arsene Wenger came in, they basically changed everything. The diets changed. It was no longer a drinking culture. But if you're talking like of the Premier League era, you're basically talking about Brendan Rodgers as being maybe, behind Claudio Ranieri, who won the league, their best manager in the modern era.
Doesn't even get Martin O'Neill a mention, eh?
Yeah,
Doesn't even get Martin O'Neill a mention.
Of course, Martin O'Neill is definitely in there as well. But what I mean is, Rodgers is certainly in the conversation as one of their greatest ever managers. It's not the norm for Leicester to be winning things.
No, and when you look at it as well, we lost Brendan Rodgers, who is a great Celtic manager, wasn't he? 7 trophies out of 7. He's went down to Leicester. Didn't quite break the top 4, but he'd got them broke into the top 6 and did very well. So he's going up against class managers, against class players every week. He developed a lot of players there, but when you look at it from Celtic's point of view now, we have now got a manager that was close to getting into that top 4. So he had the tactics and the wherewithal to go up against the best managers in the game. That's where they all are now. And he went on a European run and he won a cup down there. He brings all that to Celtic on top of what he was before Celtic. And Brendan Rodgers is always a very adaptable manager, I found. He's not wedded to the one formation or the one style of play. He adapts, he changes to the way football is. A lot of his styles are kind of like Guardiola. So we've got what we had before. Plus, he's probably learned a lot more. He's probably learned to be more pragmatic. He's probably learned a lot more about European football. Apart from the Champions League runs he had with Celtic, he'd one campaign with Liverpool. Now he's had another one with Leicester as well. He's had these cup runs. He's went up against the best managers in the world. That bodes well for Celtic, because look, he can come back to Scotland and he might.
So you're saying he's a better manager? Do you think he's a better manager now than he was first time round when he joined Celtic?
I'd say so. I think experience. I think being brought down to earth a wee bit as well, less of the Brentisms and all that, and the coaching and the management down in England has got better since he left, and as he's been there, he's been going up against the best. He'll have learned a lot from that. He'll have had to adapt to different formations. Players like Jamie Vardy was good, and then he's had to drop off a bit with his pace going, so he's had to change things up. He'll learn so much more. And even if you want to call it failure, well, you learn more from failure than you do from winning. So at Celtic, he was winning all the time. He goes down there, has to go up against great managers, great coaches, great players, comes up very well, and then has to go away and check himself after losing his job. I think, again, it lights up that fire inside for him again. If he wants to be back in the Premier League, he's going to have to do a smashing job at Celtic, which will only benefit us.
I think this the affiliation to Celtic's another thing people have questioned, and having spent the last, as the rumours kicked off, I'm feverishly going back watching every interview Brendan Rodgers ever done since he left Celtic to sort of get clues about what sort of guy he is. And I will say this for Brendan Rodgers, I never thought I'd be sitting here defending Brendan Rodgers in a Celtic podcast, and I would never defend the way he left. I would never defend the way he left Celtic, and we can talk about that as well. But one thing that's been consistent throughout his time at Leicester is how he was very highly spoken of Celtic. He was, questions were put to him, is Leicester a bigger club than Celtic? And he more or less, as Leicester manager, went, well, Celtic are actually probably a bigger club than Leicester. There were interviews that he was doing where he was talking about how, without any hesitation, I'd go back to Celtic. The time wasn't right. Well, not the time wasn't right, when the time is right, and without any hesitation, I'd go back. Then there was an interesting interview he did with Cammy and Ben Shepherd that I watched, and they asked him, why did you leave Celtic? And this is what I think brings us to why he's come back. They asked him why he left Celtic, and he said he loved his time at Celtic, he loves Glasgow, family, he did that bit, but then he went on to say, Celtic I'm paraphrasing here, but he said Celtic are more or less got the potential to make a mark in Europe. Sort of that was the phrase he used. And he goes, at the time, the club were unwilling or maybe unable to provide the investment that we needed to do that. And that was something he spoke about at Celtic. You know, if the investment stops coming, then my time here is that phrase he used, terminado, that famous interview. And I think people kind of knew that was the exit at Celtic. That was the exit. He knew the investment wasn't there. That dried up. I don't know what came first, the chicken or the egg in this scenario. He started to explore other opportunities. The investment then dried up, and then it all sort of crumbled and he left. But one thing he has been consistent about is being a Celtic fan, how he'd return, and then this question about Europe, about this making a mark in Europe, and that can mean a million different things. We will talk a wee bit about that. But what do you think, Melly, that the politics of the situation? Because one question that people put to me is, what's in it for Brendan Rodgers? What is in it for Brendan? What is the politics of Brendan Rodgers' return here? Because he, on the face of it, he's got almost nothing to gain in terms of reputation from coming back to Celtic, unless that question of Europe, for me, that question of Europe, that box there gets ticked. If you can establish Celtic as a minor European force, not win the Champions League, not, go out there and smash Man City next season, and but re-establish Celtic on that stage consistently, that's something worth doing. What do you think the politics this return is about for Brendan?
It depends. I think for people, it's a good few years that he's been away from Celtic now. For again, a guy that wasn't loyally stayed at Leicester for a long time, and things change a lot. Maybe personally things have changed for him. Maybe family situations have changed for him, where I want to go somewhere where I can leave my mark at Leicester,
where everybody knows your name, Brendan.
Exactly. But as well, Brendan Rodgers, he smashed through a lot of walls for Celtic. He done things that we didn't think were possible. But also, Ange Postecoglou coming in after that has smashed through a lot of things as well. The Champions League, getting straight into the group stage, is massive. Ange Postecoglou wiped away. Peter Law being away has changed a lot of things as well. But Ange Postecoglou smashed a lot of the myths that January transfer window was massive for us. We never signed anything in January of any repute. It's hard to bring in players in the summer. All these myths that we were told it's difficult for Celtic to sign good players and all that. That's all gone now. That's all gone. And Rodgers had a part to play in that. Postecoglou had a part to play in that. And Celtic have never been in a better position right now.
Do you think it took maybe an Ange Postecoglou coming in, working a slightly different way, and Brendan's watching from afar, and maybe when the conversations began, he goes, you know what? Things aren't the same at Celtic as they used to be. There are ways and means to do things. The board, obviously not exactly, but I've sat down to wait to Brendan and went, do you know what? See that issue we had in January about struggling to bring in players? Well, we actually found a way to resolve that now. See this thing about trying to identify talent in markets where we're not having to go out and spend 8 million quid and 9, 10, 15 million quid on players. We can bring in quality players from Asia and from Germany, from these other markets. We've got good contacts here now. Do you think it was where the combination of Celtic working and Ange, where the club have come to now, that have made it a more attractive prospect for Brendan Rodgers?
Yeah, definitely. And the Champions League thing's massive as well, isn't it? Straight in there, that means you can get the players. Celtic under Rodgers spent 9 million once. Ange's come in and Celtic have spent 6 million twice. It's unheard of.
It's more.
And they can go.
Wait, check that again.
Yeah, if you could let us know in the comments underneath this.
More. Right, okay.
So Celtic are doing things right, and with Rodgers, even when we had Rodgers, you're still not doing things right. There's still things going wrong here. Ange was in, and it was always, if he's back, he'll do well. I don't think MD can argue he wasn't back. So Rodgers has got that. He's got the European thing. Peter Law's not there. Celtic seem to be running things well. I just think it's the right time now.
Why did he come back, Stephen?
Well,
What's in it for Brendan?
Well, see, quite aside from all that, and I agree with that, those are all the benefits that we profess to offer managers as a club, this platform on which you could go and do something in Europe and then build your reputation and all that. But from a more, this might be more slightly charitable to a character like Brendan Rodgers, right? But from a more human element, maybe he just wants to come back and be the big guy again.
Yeah.
Right? I wondered about this last week as well.
Height,
he wants to come back and be the big dog in a country. Now, we can't have it both ways. Is this not what we put to people? And famously, what we said, or what people said to Brendan Rodgers when he left was, here's what you've left on the table here. You could have been this, but you traded it for that. You traded it for Leicester. You traded immortality, the chance to be a legend and all that, right? So when he comes back looking for that, can I do that again? We can't say, but that's that's not on the table for you. Again, that's taking aside all the politics and welcoming him back and all that. But if he genuinely has the opportunity to be a genuine Celtic legend, whatever kind of definition you want to put on that, then maybe that's enough for him.
I don't think that's unfair. I think there's a lot to be said for Brendan Rodgers, who, if you take the guy at face value, he's a Celtic fan. If you see the fact that he's worked here twice, and everything he said, you can fairly say that the guy's a Celtic fan. Again, the way he left, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But I don't think there's anything wrong with saying Brendan Rodgers was attracted by the prospect of coming to Celtic and making a mark. And also, quite aside for Celtic, he might just quite enjoy being the big guy in a country, being a major player in a football league, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Genuinely don't think that's ridiculous at all. That's a big appeal for someone like that. I mean, we know, of course, the major joke about Brendan Rodgers is he's a bit of an egomaniac, right? But again, that's
all these top guys are. You tell me Mourinho's not an egomaniac.
Try and become successful as a football manager without having some sort of egomania about your megalomania. So I think that's of huge appeal for him to. Maybe he's deluded by thinking that he can jump ship in the way he did and just come back and pick up where he left off and everything's going to be fine. Maybe we will see. It's going to be intriguing when the first game rolls around, the true fan reception, because I'm not really paying attention to Twitter just yet, because we will find out. I personally think the overwhelming reaction to Brendan Rodgers coming back will be positive. Now, I'm not judging anyone for the reaction. I know how much of a hot potato this is, him coming back.
I'm not sure it's. Part of me is thinking that it's not as much of a hot potato as some people would like it to be, because the response has been overwhelmingly positive. And I think Celtic fans, we on this podcast, we kind of treat a lot of things with humour. Do you know what I mean? A lot of the comment on it has been, I go Leites again, all that sort of part. This will be great until it's no. It's been that sort of vibe. If you haven't heard already, it's Smooth Sack Summer. When you're playing in the summer sun, make sure you're scaped from pubes to bum. That's right, this summer, keep your balls cool while still looking hot with Manscaped. The leaders in below the waist grooming are making sure we all have a ball this summer by giving our pant partners everything we need to stay fresh. The wording gets worse. Dive headfirst into Smooth Sack Summer by going to manscaped.com for 20% off and free shipping with our code TIMS, TIMS.
The Manscaped Performance Package 4.0 has everything you need to prepare that summer bod. They've built the ultimate grooming bundle for your summer grooming. The Lawnmower 4.0 trimmer features a cutting-edge ceramic blade to reduce grooming accidents thanks to their advanced skin-safe technology. The Lawnmower 4.0 has a 7,000 RPM motor. A new multifunction on-off switch can engage a travel lock and gives you the ability to turn on the 4000K LED spotlight on and off when needed for a more precise shave. Did I mention this trimmer is stunning quality, waterproof too? Beach, lake or shower, this razor will devour even the strongest pubes.
Get 20% off and free shipping with the code TIMS at manscaped.com. That's 20% off, free shipping when you insert the code TIMS, TIMS at manscaped.com. It's Smooth Sack Summer, boys. Get on board or get left behind. I think you're right, Stephen. I think there is an element of, the ego about Brendan Rodgers, an element of he is definitely a Celtic fan. I think there's probably an element of whether or not he sees it this way, maybe wanting to right some wrongs. Although there's no question he might not think he did anything wrong with the way he left. But I think another thing that a lot of people are talking about, and it's been rumoured that he's been sold on a project. It's been ruled that he's been sold on a project at Celtic. The way things normally go when you get back 1X is things will be different this time. And I think that's basically what he's been sold at Celtic. The things we were speaking about, Melly, about the recruitment's slightly different. And I don't think, having said all the things he said in the past, I don't see Brendan Rodgers coming back to Celtic without the goal being making a mark on Europe. Now, we could sit here and have a whole entire podcast dedicated to what that might mean.
Yeah.
Some people think making a mark in Europe means nothing unless you get out of a Champions League group, right? So there's one. Some people think making a mark on Europe, if that's your goal, you fail if you don't make the Europa League final, right? Some people think that's a failure. Some people think making a mark on Europe is just making sure you get into the Champions League group stage every single season, and that's where you compete. So it means a million different things. But I think one thing's for sure, Celtic as a club need to be there or thereabouts in Europe. And I think not an unrealistic goal if this is where you're channeling the forces and channeling the investment in the manager, and everybody's working towards it, is to say, let's try and make a European final in 5 years. I don't think that's an unrealistic goal, and I think that's maybe what Brendan Rodgers has been sold on. He's been sold on, we're bringing you back to achieve the things that you wanted to achieve first time around that maybe we didn't facilitate the right way, i.e. investment, i.e. the right type of player.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's changed as well. A Scottish team has got to a European final, unfortunately, since he was last here. So I think he'll say, I can do that. But Europe's massive. I think the Champions League's going to be huge. Knowing you're going to be there, knowing that it was that, do we need to sell players? And the Champions League's there, but Celtic have also moved forward in this sort of player model strategy, haven't they? They are selling players. Kieran Tierney went for 25 million. Since then, we've been selling players at higher prices and bringing in a lot more players then. So, and
of course the Champions League's key at that. These players do well in Scotland, we get good money for them. They do well in Europe, we get great money for them. That's the difference.
Yeah, and it's now at the point at Celtic where you're like that, right, that's a lot of money in the bank. What's the point in that if the results aren't going in the pitch? Celtic are doing well on the pitch, not in Europe, but so go out and use that money to speculate, to accumulate. And Celtic have got the chance now, with this guaranteed Champions League money, having a really good footballing team now, to go out there, improve on that, improve on the facilities we've got there. We all know the training ground and all that could do with a wee spruce up. What happened to the museum and all that? I want all that. But
yeah, remember that? I was talking to somebody about
hotel,
that. The hotel in the museum.
the floating pitch and all that. But I think as well, with the European thing, to make a mark in Europe is something that will be there for Brendan Rodgers. He's had that taste of that European run with Leicester as well. If we want a guy who's going to be successful, we want somebody that's going to be ambitious. If he does want to get back to the Premier League, he will have to make a mark in Europe with Celtic. If he went to Crystal Palace, say, it's going to be very difficult for him to get one of the top 6 jobs. But if he does well in Europe with Celtic again, then it might be something for him. But look, that might be gone for him. But in any way, even if he does that, the Champions League is huge for them. This is the last year where it's in its current format. Next year it goes, you're guaranteed 8 games, I think it is, when it changes. That's massive for Celtic. That's massive for Scottish football. So he'll have 8 guaranteed games. Then if you progress after that, there's more chance of progression. So it's going to be very interesting.
And a 3-year contract, Stephen.
Yeah.
It's a 3-year contract.
None
I mean,
of this rolling pish.
Obviously none of these rolling contracts. It's a 3-year contract, which presumably means plenty of money if he does decide to jump ship for us, and plenty of money for Brendan Rodgers if he stays, obviously.
Yeah.
So that tells me that he's went, right, someone's went, or he's went, right, give me 3 years and we'll see what we can pull off here.
Yeah, the thing is, we're looking at it entirely from Brendan Rodgers' angle. What's in it for him? What's the point in having a 3-year contract if that's a 3-year plan and all that? But as much as it might be unpalatable for us just now during the excitement, it might not work out this time around either. We might not want to be stuck with him for 3 years. It might not be as good this time around.
Of course, yeah.
Football's moved on. And another thing that's moved on massively, Celtic have moved on hugely since Brendan was last year. It's almost hard to get your head around just how far Celtic have come in that fairly short to medium period of time there. But something else that's moved on massively is the Champions League, which is why making a mark in Europe just seems like such a vague term to me just now. No, it's not permanent, because as we will be sitting in these chairs reacting to a Champions League group draw at some point, and then we'll know what making a mark in Europe is, because there's every chance we could build ourselves up. Brendan Rodgers, you have to make a mark in Europe, or it's a waste of time that we're tearing up your contract, and then we go and draw Man City, Real Madrid and Borussia Dortmund or something like that in a group, and we're definitely going to go out of it.
I think at that point, I hear what you're saying.
Yeah.
I think at that point though, people would be realistic enough to go, right, okay, that first one kind of doesn't count.
I hope so, yeah, I think so, but that's still valid. I think it's going to take time. I think expecting anything in the first season,
it's a club-wide project as well, isn't it? It's not just pointing to Brendan Rodgers and going, well, you said you were going to make a mark in Europe, and he's like, well, hold on, they brought Azagiri back for a third shot. I can't do much with that.
And look, it is not impossible. What Melly referenced as well, look, Rangers did get to a European final out of absolutely nowhere. No one expected that this season. Celtic could go on an absolute tear this season, shock the world and do brilliantly in the Champions League. My thought on it just now is just let's just see how it goes. Well, it's going to take time, because we've really got nowhere in Europe in the last however many years. We've been really underwhelming in Europe. Aside from
and
the
I
odd,
think that's it. I think that's the key, isn't
Yeah.
it? Brendan's probably watched that and went, we've been really underwhelmed. We
Yeah.
can do better than this.
of course, yeah.
And we are back a bit of investment. We can, maybe not win that group with Barcelona and Man City and Borussia. Maybe not win that group, but he goes, do you know what? If we get into this Europa Conference League, if we get into a Europa League, if we, we have to start qualifying for the Champions League again, don't we? We're not automatically in the Champions League in perpetuity. There will come a time very soon when we need to start qualifying for it again. Maybe he's went, right, I'm the guy to guide you in there and make sure that always happens.
Yeah, I'd love a conference run at some point as well. See, looking at how much West Ham enjoyed that last season.
How much David Moyes loved it.
Exactly, I'd love that at some point. Of course, the Champions League is always the goal. Of course, it is. But I'm not a snob about these so-called sort of Diddy competitions underneath that at all. I'd absolutely love a few trips into that.
Right, we're all big boys, and we're all big boys, and it's fair to say that doing this podcast game, it's very easy for us to sit here, throw about judgments,
yes,
make bold claims, make bold statements, and very few, in fact, rarely do we have to face up and face these bold statements, right? However, we sat here after Brendan Rodgers left and we flung about terms like disgrace, rat, never welcome back at Celtic Park and all that sort of stuff. And the fact of the matter is he's back, and the fact of the matter is we go to press conferences from time to time, and the fact of the matter is we might be sat in front of the guy at some point. So he might turn and say to us, you're the guys that call me a rat. You.
And he will remember.
Yeah.
He'll have notes.
You're the guy. He probably will
Yeah.
have a dossier on every single person who called him a prick, who called him a rat, who said such and such. So, and there'll be people listening to this podcast going, listen to you gushing him now. It wasn't that 4 years ago when I used to listen to 20-minute times, you were slaughtering the guy and blah, blah, blah. So I think we should take this time. So do you stand by it? Do you think it was fair? How do you square that circle, Stephen?
Look, I think, a lot of things would have been said at the time, but I'm not going to apologise for that. If it went too far, I can't really remember. If it went too far, then I will accept that. I don't think we...
If Brendan Rodgers presented you called me a cock. You went, okay, maybe I shouldn't have called you a cock.
You beardy twat.
Yeah.
Stuff like that. Look, if it got... I don't think so, though. Judging by the tone of our general podcast, we do tend to take things in decent humour. Like Brendan Rodgers leaving shocked us all, and I think we were all a bit raw after it, a little bit emotional, because look, the support 4 years on, we're all still kind of feeling it when we all kind of went back into that playbook when Ange left. Like, how can we compare these two situations? We don't know how to react any other way.
I mean, even when Ange left, I said, look, do my Ange look nothing compared to Brendan Rodgers. We used that comparison.
Yeah, of course. But a lot has changed since then. Realistically, we have to either swallow it and just accept that he is the best man for the job, or we can spend the next season in a huff about it. And again, I'm
such a good turn of phrase.
But genuinely, I will not criticise anyone for thinking that, because it was tough at the time. I do accept that. I am open to the fact that, or to the possibility rather, that maybe it was just a bit of an overreaction based on the timing of it, yes, and that's his fault. But also, there was an awful lot of pressure and tension throughout the fans at that time because of the 10 in a row thing. We were all aiming towards that, and we all kind of lost sight of things. We all started calling everybody who left a rat. Kieran Tierney, never a Celtic fan. Neil Lennon's never a Celtic man, all that kind of stuff. So I think all of the stuff that had built up for the previous 2.5 years, we were singing Brendan Rodgers here for 10 in a row, all that stuff. And when he upped and left, that all felt very precarious, and we didn't get there in the end anyway, as history tells. So I think it is possible that maybe we all just overreacted a little bit to what was a professional decision from the guy. Maybe that helped me, because I very easily came to terms with Ange doing the same thing. I was very kind of diplomatic about that. I thought, right, it's just an opportunity for the guy. Good luck to him. I thank him for what he achieved here in that space. I don't like it, but Brendan Rodgers, it was rough at the time, and we probably said a few things that were a little bit beyond the pale. But what are the alternatives here?
What I would say is this. I would say that the way Brendan Rodgers left was wrong.
Yeah,
100% wrong. It's not his fault, but if he stayed, we would have won 10 in a row. 100%. No question in my mind. The way he left was wrong, and I think it was, and I would say this if I was sat in front of him, I think it was a touch hypocritical to give the big Celtic fan stuff, and yeah, I know he is, but as you said, he made a professional decision, and I know it's a lot of money and all that, but could Leicester have waited until the end of the season, a couple more weeks in effectively where it was before the season finished up, before the league was wrapped up, before you could go to Leicester City? Maybe it was take it now and never darken their door again or stay at Celtic. But I think the way he left was wrong. I think you don't do that to a club like Celtic. You don't just disappear in the middle of the night and take the whole staff and rush down to Leicester because you're so enamoured by this prospect of the Premier League. I think if I would like to think if the same situation came up again in 18 months or 2 years, Brendan Rodgers would act differently. So I think that's fair. As for the insults we were throwing about at him and all that, look, it's knockabout stuff.
Yeah,
do you know what I mean? And that comes with the territory. Brendan Rodgers knows you're going to be put on this massive pedestal. Brendan Rodgers knows that if you're going to get 16,000 people at the High Road to watch you chat to Eamon Holmes about God knows what, if you leave in the middle of the night, one or two of these people are going to be pissed off.
Yeah.
I think that's fair enough, and I think it's par for the course, and I think it's all part of the game. And you're right, I don't think we went too overboard. Call him a rat.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of people don't realise.
It's the vibe of the day, wasn't it?
A lot of people don't realise when we were saying that we meant really astute tactician. That's what we meant. You know, a rat. Really, another treble. That's kind of
every single iteration, every use of that word was an acronym for really astute tactician. Go back and check.
Yeah,
go
check
back and
the
check
record, as you might say.
Go back in context and everything.
Stephen, sorry, Melly, have you got a confession you would make to Brendan Rodgers?
I would. Look, I just say that if I was speaking to him, it was wrong the way you left.
Yeah.
On the eve of a massive game, just before a cup quarter final and a away tie, you couldn't have waited a week and got them out the way, and then I think we had a week's break to the next game. But no, it was game on Saturday, Monday night we done a podcast, then Tuesday morning, and then on the Tuesday evening he was getting interviewed in the Leicester tie and all that. It just felt it was a bit too quick for everything to go down. But yes, maybe we overreacted. I can't quite remember my reaction, but the fact is, that was the first time this had happened to us.
Yeah.
Managers don't leave Celtic like that. They had never in my lifetime. Managers had either left at the end of the season or been sacked. Nobody had ditched Celtic and left like that.
Yeah.
So it was a shock. I remember getting up in the morning and seeing it, the rumours, and then there was the tweet from Stephen McGowan, and I remember looking at my phone going, no. First thing in the morning, because that's when you knew it was real. So for that to happen, it was a whirlwind, but you're going to get blowback if you leave Celtic in that manner. MD will get it. MD will get it, but for a guy to say he's a fan and all that, even if he waited a week, he still would have got all the bad press and all that from Celtic fans. And look, rightly so, you're leaving Celtic as a massive team, but you left to benefit yourself. And I think because that is the first time it has happened, it was raw at the time, but I've learned from it, like, this is a job to these guys. Again, like when Kieran Tierney left, like, you say, oh, he's a Celtic fan, he should never leave. Him growing up as a Celtic fan is completely different to us growing up as Celtic fans. We never have to make these decisions. We watch Celtic games because that's what we do on a Saturday. He has Celtic games for his under 10s, 12, whatever, all the way up. It's totally different. The same as Brendan Rodgers. Every time Celtic play, basically, he's managing a football team throughout his career. He's had to check Celtic scores, so it's different for him. But leaving in the middle of the night was no good. The way it all happened wasn't good. The way we as fans and myself reacted probably wasn't good. But I've learned from it. This is football now. I think it showed that things can change, and I think football has changed a lot in that time as well. That you get a 2 to 3 year cycle with people, and look. Brendan Rodgers staying for 10 in a row, it was another 2 seasons. Celtic still won the treble that season. They still won a treble the following season. It's no his fault we didn't win 10 in a row. It's Celtic's fault.
Whatever I did say at the time, I'm not going to take back because that would be silly. I did say it, as I said, check the record, but it's definitely there.
Take it back, we'd be calling you a pussy if you did it.
And look, but it doesn't mean I need to stick to it going forward because things have changed. I remembered exactly what I mainly said after we threw around the silly insults and all that. The main thing I said was that only 2 things are ever going to matter about Brendan Rodgers' time at Celtic. One, the unprecedented level of success he undoubtedly delivered in his time here, and 2, the way he snuck out the back door in the middle of the night and left us in the lurch and left us struggling to fill the backroom staff to take on a game, phoning up Lenny's pals and all that. He did it on Saturday and all that. So all those 2 things were the only things that mattered at the time, but that's changed now because we've now got a future with the guy. Now I've got a choice here. I can either just stick to what I said now years ago and just no give him a chance and just again go in a huff about it, chuck my season ticket, give it to somebody on the waiting list and all that, or I can just choose to see the positives in it, look beyond that and get behind them and hope for more success coming forward. And again, I don't want that to be misconstrued as me criticising anyone who chooses not to do that. You're well within your rights to just go, nah, this is beyond the pale for me. I believe that Celtic should have been better than that. I believe that Celtic shouldn't have gone crawling back to this like Judas and all that. Right, if that's your position, I'm genuinely not going to fall out with you over it, but my position is not that. I'm choosing to just accept them back, and maybe we've learned from a few things over the last few years and we can hopefully go forward together.
I think overall, mostly with respect to what we said at the time, right? Nobody cares. Nobody cares what we think.
Brendan Rodgers definitely doesn't.
Brendan Rodgers definitely doesn't. But what we did get a lot of tweets, mostly from Rangers fans, but some from Celtic fans going, "Oh, so he's not a rat anymore." So you're like, well, why not bring it up? We're big boys. We're not afraid to. We're not going to sit here and kid on. We didn't call the guy a rat. We did, and we called him a rat because of the way we left, and we still think the way he left was a bit rat-like.
And look, see on this thing again, I'm not speaking for anyone, and I'm not going to criticise them for this because they're just expressing themselves. But as we record this, the North Curve, who are an enormous fans group online and in the stadium, have made their displeasure known online, referencing the banner that they made at the time, saying "Never a Celt, always a fraud," all that. That's entirely a valid position to take. However, I hope that is just a sort of one-off statement of really, right, we've not forgotten, this is what we think of this, but we're all going to kind of get on the same page going forward. But again, everyone's entitled to whatever protest they want to make about it.
But best luck to them, I think.
It's kind of good for us as well because...
us three?
Us as millions and millions of Celtic fans, but he now has to prove people wrong, doesn't he? In his own support, rather than, as usual in this country, going into the next season as second favourite to win the league probably. He has to turn around some of his own fans, and that's a challenge. That is a challenge for him, and next season anything but a treble, will that be seen as a success for him? Because that's what we're used to from him. He's got to go out and he's got to get signings right, because that's something that's been held against him as well.
Let's talk about that. It's next on the agenda, actually. The two next things on the agenda are the signings. We're going to end on a positive, but it's not our fault. The signings and the football style, because do the signings first, but I think there's an interesting question here about the style of football, because Brendan Rodgers was very much possession based, recycle the ball side to side and wait for the wee gaps to open up and exploit them in that way, whereas it's quite different from what Celtic fans have been watching over the past couple of years for Brendan Rodgers. And we've all sat around here and everybody loves the football and we think it's the best football we've seen under a Celtic manager for a very long time. So there's definitely a difference in style there that's probably worth touching on. And we'll definitely have scouting podcasts to go a bit further into that. And the transfers are something that you guys turned to on the Breakfast of Champions, the most recent Breakfast of Champions, which is
great fun, Steve.
Yes, it was,
which is something we do on patreon.com/20minute Tims. That's an extra weekly Celtic news podcast, sort of nestles in between flagship recordings. It's like Big Brother's Little Brother podcast. The flagship's Little Brother, that's available on patreon.com/20minute Tims. And you guys had the pleasure of sitting down and having a look through all the Brendan Rodgers signings. But what was your conclusion you came up with?
Well, we put them into three brackets, didn't we? Game changer, meh, and outright flop.
Yep.
Yeah.
You could probably guess where most of them went. But
I can't, so please tell me, and other listeners might not be able to.
Outright flop, most of them. I think was there 27 transfers, wasn't there? But at the same time as that, there was a pattern. The first 2 seasons, the transfers were good to decent, and then it just completely fell off a cliff. So you could see where things started to go wrong for Celtic and Brendan Rodgers. So the recruitment has to get better, but the good thing with that is Celtic's recruitment has got much better. It's never been as good as...
It's a club-wide thing, is it? It's not just a manager.
It shouldn't just be the manager, should it? This is what we want. When managers leave, it doesn't mean everything up and goes with them. And Celtic have been lucky enough, we haven't mentioned it yet, that all the backroom staff have stayed at Celtic, which is great continuity for Celtic. This is guys that have worked under Neil Lennon, Ronnie Dyla, even Brendan before, and now Ange Postecoglou, and they get to keep all that and add another very good manager in there. So we've got all that. The recruitment has to be better under Rodgers this time. It should be better. We have Mark Law in charge of a lot of things. We've changed a lot of the scouting. We are scouting much further. I think Brexit's changed things as well. So look, that's all should be in Celtic's favour now. We've started selling players. Plus, the squad is in a place right now where we don't have to sell MD, and we have a lot of sellable assets, even if we were to.
The transfers is key for Brendan, isn't it? That's definitely, he's not entirely responsible for that, but then the managers carry the can.
Yeah.
That's one to watch, isn't it, going forward?
Well, I think much like what we talked about with the Leicester thing earlier, a lot of context has to come into this. It's not just that Brendan Rodgers flopped at Leicester. There's a lot more detail to it than that. I think it's impossible to mention Brendan Rodgers' record in the transfer market with Celtic without mentioning the names of Lee Congerton and Peter Lawwell. These are the three key roles in that tragic play that they played out in front of us.
Triangle.
Yeah, so they were all to blame. To what extent, I don't know, but all of them were to blame in some way or another. But that's another thing about the longevity thing. Now, it's all, I think we kind of have this romantic notion in our heads that a manager needs to come in and they've got a 5-year plan, they stay forever and they stay for ages. That doesn't really happen now. But see, when you look at the nature of the recruitment that happens under certain managers, there's probably a pattern emerging where it starts off brilliantly because they get the players they want up front right away because they've probably identified it right away. These are the players I want in straight away. And then it gradually declines. There's even, I know we're only 2 seasons in, but people had even started questioning the last window from Ange, talking about how no one came in and really made any impact on the first team just yet. So it tends to be that way. First window's great and then it starts to sort of trickle down. Martin O'Neill was exactly the same.
Martin O'Neill, Gordon Strachan, Neil Lennon first time round, Rodgers. It's happened everywhere.
So if that's the case, do we really want a guy any longer than 3 years? Do we really? Should we, for the benefit of us as the fans and the club and all that, should we not be getting shot at these guys after 2 or 3 years and getting totally fresh ideas in? So it's another way of looking at things. I know, again, the preferable thing back in the day would have been you get a guy and he stays for 10, 15 years and you just sort of grow old together and it's always the same. A comfy old pair of jeans, got the same manager there. But if it's probably more evidence that you really need a new injection of ideas every so often.
Or with Celtic, you need to be a wee bit more creative in the transfer market.
Yeah.
I do agree with your point that there's diminishing returns on football managers. There kind of always is. But I think, specifically when it comes to Brendan Rodgers, I think he struggled with the Celtic budget.
Oh yeah,
I think. I mean, we obviously don't for certain, but I think when these managers presented with a group of players, Brendan Rodgers would look at them and go, "Where's the £15 million option?" Well, Brendan, we don't have a £15 million option. We have Jack Hendry, Marvin Compper, and you had this really bizarre situation with Brendan Rodgers, and I think this is part of the way the old system worked, where players like Shved and Compper, there's 2 you could pick there. They turned up and Brendan Rodgers immediately took a dislike to them. Like, they never played a game.
We've got a short list here, Brendan. Right? We've got numbers 1 to 10 here. Yeah. Right, 1 is 15 million and number 10 is free. Brendan's saying, right, can I take the top one, 50 million? Kind of interested in 10. Let's haggle. We'll meet somewhere in the middle.
But I mean, you wonder, like looking back, you wonder how a guy like Marvin Compper ends up at Celtic. We don't need to retread old ground, but who signed off on that? You hope things have changed. You hope that wasn't so much Brenda's influence and that was the way the club. But as you say, we still kind of see it with Ange. We got McCarthy in. Definitely didn't look like an Ange player. Has hardly played and will probably be out the door. Oh my God, his name has been mispronounced so often now. I can only remember the mispronunciation, but it's not Abregard. What's his name?
Abelgard.
There you go. Yeah. I can only remember the mispronunciation. So you're looking at these players and you're thinking, well, the sort of echoes, as you say, of what was happening before. Another thing that is worth mentioning is the football style, because Brendan Rodgers had a very particular style, and we did enjoy it at times. I mean, with Celtic are winning, you're going to enjoy the football, but there is a difference, isn't there, between Ange and Brendan. We're going to have a podcast on that. We're going to have a podcast on their different styles on patreon.com, and if you want to listen to the guys talk over Brendan Rodgers transfers and go down a lovely trip down memory lane, that's still available on patreon.com/20minutetims on the treble tier. So the football style's a wee bit different. You think it's going to be an adjustment period for us Mellies fans? Or do you think Brendan's changed? Do you think he can replicate what Ange did?
Yeah, I think he's a very adaptable manager. The guy isn't wedded to one style. At Liverpool, he changed to a 3-4-3. At Celtic, he went back to the 4-2-3-1. Leicester, he played a number of formations to horses for courses. So I think it's going to be like that for Celtic. I think he'll have adapted as a manager. I think he'll have found ways that work, which hopefully will benefit us in Europe. And look, Brendan Rodgers, like I said last week, is the only guy to have won a Champions League group game in the last 10 seasons for Celtic. So if his style of play where we keep the ball is better for us, because we've seen under Ange, it was gung-ho. So if I'm not saying it was bad in any way, it was great watching Ange's team, whether we get beaten Europe or we won, which we didn't win an awful lot in the Champions League. But Celtic were very, very open. Brendan Rodgers is a little bit more pragmatic, keeping the ball, like we've seen from Gordon Strachan to from Martin O'Neill to Gordon Strachan, keeping the ball a bit longer helped us in Europe. So it might be beneficial in Europe, but Celtic's bread and butter is the league. It's going to be very difficult for Brendan Rodgers to top Ange Postecoglou's style of play, but it's going to be different. But if Celtic win the league and come out successful, it doesn't really matter, does it?
No, winning football is fun football, Stephen.
Yeah, that's correct. And hopefully we'll get some fun football. Get some fun football, number one. But I don't think he'll come back to Celtic and replicate exactly what he did 4, 5, 6 years ago now when he started, because it's so long ago.
Yeah.
And see, to be honest, you wouldn't need Brendan Rodgers to do that. You could ask John Kennedy to do that, no bother. If it was just a case of do what Brendan Rodgers did 5 years ago, you get anybody to do that, really. It's about adapting. And even it may be even difficult to compare Leicester to Celtic because the objectives are very different.
Yeah.
They're not going to get the same level of possession as Brendan has shown in the past that he valued at Celtic. So
I'm just glad we're not going to hear the word Ange ball anymore.
Yeah, so is it Rodge ball? Has it?
Rodge ball, brain ball.
Yeah, brain ball. I think I'd like to go back and see some of the kind of latter day Rodgers football, because I think much like the baby out with the bathwater style of these things, maybe that's been slightly exaggerated. I don't think it was as good as first season. How could it be with the invincible treble and all that? But I think there's been a sort of move to make it was all terrible. The style of football was garbage towards the end.
You've got to consider the recruitment. Think of some of these players that were turned out for his Ollie Burke and all that sort of stuff. You know what I mean? Absolutely grim. So there is, so overall, we're pretty positive, very positive on the Ange return.
No choice, really. That's
but you're
that's
positive because you don't have a choice, or are you naturally positive about it?
Well, I mean, I'm opinionated. I like I'm on about things, but I think in general, but in general, as a fan, I'm pretty positive. I defend players and I defend managers and all that until they give me absolutely no choice, and I have to reassess it. But going into this, I do have the choice. I can be negative.
I'm absolutely buzzing about it.
I could be negative about it, but I don't see any point in doing that. I think we just need to suck it up, really. All that stuff that happened in the past, yes, it did happen. You don't need necessarily forgive it or forget it, but we need to kind of move forward for the good of the club. We need to get on with it, really.
I'm absolutely delighted about the appointment of Brendan Rodgers. I was pissed off back then, but I don't hold a grudge for 4 years. No. As long as it doesn't raise its head again, who cares? But I just want to I'm excited because I think we've got a top class manager here, Melly.
Yeah, I'm delighted as well. I think the Rodgers thing, look, I've accepted what happened, and you kind of need to just accept it and move on. Whether you forget is another.
It's Ange we hate now.
It's another story. But if he hadn't moved on, look, we wouldn't have got Ange and all that. And now that he's back, he's a top class manager. We've seen that the way he operates at Celtic and elsewhere. When Ange left, you're looking about who could Celtic realistically get. My top 2 were Potter and Rodgers. Potter was pie in the sky. That was never going to happen. But Celtic, I've heard, asked him the question, and then the other guy they've got. So we can go on about how poorly Celtic are running all that and what's all wrong with them. But Celtic have changed a lot since Brendan Rodgers left for the better. Well, since Neil Lennon left for the better. Things have changed dramatically. Brendan Rodgers coming into that, he is the best man we could have got. Yes, he comes with a bit of baggage, but I'd take that over an unknown quantity any day.
I'll take. Oh, Stephen, you got something?
Yeah, or just a final thing on the nature of the appointment as well. Look, we lost a manager, a very popular manager. Look, things have happened since, and people weren't happy about Ange leaving after the cup final. But we lost a very popular and charismatic and easy to get behind manager just a couple of weeks ago. And still in June, Celtic have gone out and appointed the most high-profile manager they can possibly hope to attract. Right, on the surface of things, again, taking all the obvious sort of complications with it aside, that's a job well done by the club. I mean, what more could we possibly ask? A lesser manager with less baggage? Yeah, if that's a deal you're willing to make, if that's a compromise you're willing to make, fine. But they've gone out and get the best man for the job within 2 weeks of the previous guy leaving.
I'll tell you this, there was about 10 days between Ange leaving and Brendan Rodgers arriving.
Right.
And for that 10 days, Rangers fans were delighted. Because when Ange walked out the door, they thought, this is it. Rangers knew with Ange, they were in place at Celtic, they were never going to win a thing. They just could not beat this guy. And when Ange left, they were partying and they were delighted and they thought, this is it. And you can, even, I'm sure, Beale and all that, they're sitting in the office, they're signing all these players, bringing all these guys on and big money, and Butland and all these players for down south are like, this is it. Oh, we'll need to wait and see who they approach. I'm telling you right now, doesn't matter the bravado, doesn't matter what they say online, it matters not a jot. To see the return of Brendan Rodgers to Celtic, they're terrified.
This is the one thing they didn't want to happen.
Honestly, they are absolutely terrified. You can tell just by the comments. We've not had as much interaction with Rangers fans on social media.
Oh wow!
As we have since the word that Brendan Rodgers came back. They are absolutely terrified, and they should be.
The YouTube comments are incredible these days. Thanks for keeping us going. By the way, Rangers fans these days, you can set your watch by it. We get more comments now from Rangers fans than anything else, and it's always a nice wee boost to see the clever lot that they are. Bombard us with comments at like 2 o'clock and 3 o'clock on Sunday morning. I wake up, check the comments overnight, and it's always, oh, yous are obsessed from the clever lot that are sitting with a Saturday night watching a Celtic podcast. Yous are obsessed.
Well, they're going to be obsessed all over again with Brendan Rodgers, because when they watched a treble winning manager go out the door, they thought, oh, who are they going to get? Are they going to give the job to John Kennedy? Is it going to be one of these rookies? And in walks a guy that won, 3 trebles, more or less?
Almost,
one invincible treble. It's terrible news for Rangers. Yeah. And I put out the tweet on 20 Minute Tims, and it's got so many bookmarks. It's obviously Rangers fans, but I want you to remember this, clip this. With Brendan Rodgers in charge at Celtic, Rangers are winning nothing. Clip that. And we'll see you next week. Thank you so much for listening to 20 Minute Tim. Subscribe to us on YouTube. Support our Patreon, patreon.com/20 Minute Tims. The content continues throughout the summer. Thanks for watching and listening.